all started about 6 blocks from here in the home of the Morgans. And it started in their home, and there were 5 families. There were the Ludwigs, which was me. There were the Martins, which is Bernice and Victor Volz. There was the Bjorks and the Normos, and he led songs, and he played trombone. And there were the Vicks, and he was the pastor. He lived in Portland, but he pastored here for many years. And that's where it started, and it moved from their house to this little place right here.
So this happens at least once or twice a week where you say, get in the car. And I don't know if it's like Chick-fil-A or if we're going to scope out in another area of Vancouver or what's going on. So what are we doing today?
We are going to, Ty, do you know how old our church is?
I do. It's 79 years old, right?
Yep,
Yeah.
almost 80 years old. And today we're going to do something I've never done before. In now almost 7 years I've been at the church. We're going to go back and trace the steps of all the different eras of church life, where the physical facilities, or at least the areas that the church met over these last 79 years. Navigator, where are we going here?
Yeah. So we're getting on I-5 right now, I-5 North. This is the first Vancouver Gospel Chapel location that wasn't a house, from what we can tell, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a guy named V.C. Morgan, and I don't think he was probably the only one, but it was at his house that the prayer meetings kind of began in 1937. And then the church officially incorporated in 1938. And they had, in the first couple of years, they had 3 physical locations. So we're headed to the first location, and it looks like we're getting into a little bit of a development housing wise.
So this is the first building outside of a house. So this is like these people pooling their money together, like figuring out, can they afford the monthly rent or whatever on some probably small-ish structure in order to have a church that's not in a house.
I mean, a lot of times it could be someone in the church owns a business or has a connection, locally in the community, and they end up meeting in a hall there. Nowadays, you'll see a lot of churches like at these phases will meet in schools, school gym, school theater. So here we are, O Street and 33rd. And
maybe they meant that shed right there.
It was right, yeah. Maybe in that shed, maybe in that house-ish doctor's office looking thing. So here it is, corner O Street and 33rd, and everywhere around here just residential, right? The very first pastor of the church that the church called in 1938 was a guy named John J. Vick, V-I-C-K, and he actually pastored the church for 6 years.
So this is still Vancouver Gospel Chapel days.
Yeah, Vancouver Gospel Chapels.
Yep. New name it.
So the name wasn't changed to Glad Tidings yet. It was Vancouver Gospel Chapel at these different locations, and so in that very, very first generation, the very first 5 years of the church's existence, you had one pastor, but that pastor led the church to 4 different physical locations, of which we're going to see the second one right now.
So this is like right down here, Compass Coffee, Heathen Brewery. Like we're
downtown, man.
Yeah.
Right here, 4th and Washington.
But I just found the IOOF. What it is.
IOF Hall.
Yeah. So the IOF is the Independent Order of Odd Fellows.
Okay. So
apparently they're like an Elks Lodge or an Eagles Lodge type thing. But yeah, they're Independent Order of Odd Fellows. They were founded in Baltimore, Maryland. Yeah.
And so the church, 1938, 1939, begins to meet in the Independent Order of Odd Fellows Hall, which is kind of funny.
Dude, they're right by Esther Shore Park. I mean,
right here, so second location right by Esther Shore Park. I wonder how old Esther Shore Park is.
1853. Oldest public park in Washington.
Wow.
So it was...
So Esther Shore Park was there.
Yeah, been there for a while.
Okay, so we're headed up toward Mill Plain now from downtown.
Yep, we're going to pretty much go straight north of downtown. We're almost there.
Third physical location. This one we actually do have a building that is still in existence. And what's the business that's there?
Yeah, so it's called the Thirsty Sasquatch.
Okay.
It's a tap room, pub, hall, I guess.
Okay. Nice.
So, Thirsty Sasquatch.
Here it is, man. There's a tap room here, a Mexican restaurant next door. So it's one of these spots. And
So it feels like we've gone a lot of different directions, but really we've seen it's like 3 mile radius, 2 or 3 mile radius downtown Vancouver.
Yeah.
We actually got the chance to talk to someone who was a child in the VGC days in this location. So yeah.
Let's check it out.
Yeah.
Well, you got to remember now, I am 85 and I was 5 years old. So that stretches one's memory. But I remember coming here, I don't know if it was the first Sunday, but I remember very well coming here. We lived in Battleground, and we drove in an old Durante car, and then I'd sleep all the way home. And I remember coming here. Well, I remember the little song we sang. They had a little theme song here, and it's very short, and so I haven't got a voice, but I'll sing it for you. And the name of this little place was Vancouver Gospel Chapel. And the little song went, at this Vancouver Gospel Chapel, everybody's welcome. Come and find your Savior here. His every need he'll meet for you, spirit, soul, and body too, in answer to believing prayer. And that was the little song.
Okay, so this next time period is like a time of massive change in the church. There was a lot of growth, I guess. They moved a little bit out of the downtown area, and I'm not very far. Like we're only a couple miles away, you know. But Krogstad, right? Ellsworth Krogstad.
Ellsworth Krogstad, and I mean, he's the shortest tenured pastor in the history of the church. In 80 years, he's the shortest tenure, like a year. He pastored the church about a year. But what he did is he changed the name from Vancouver Gospel Chapel, the original name, to Glad Tidings Church, and then helped move the church around this time, 1944, 1945. You think of this is the end of World War II, right? And so World War II is going on, the church is growing a bit, and they move again for the fourth time in their short 5 to 6 year history. They moved to Grand Boulevard, which we still have people in the church today who had family members at that time or who were alive during that time who remember the Grand Boulevard Church, because this becomes this next facility we're going to see after moving four different facilities in 6 years. This becomes the fourth, and the church finally got some rooting there and was in this facility for 25 years. And so Ellsworth Krogstad, I don't know if he was too big of a part of moving the church there, but definitely.
All right, we're getting close.
Bringing it to Glad Tidings Church. Here's Grand Boulevard here.
Lord's Gym, is that the building?
Yep. Oh, look at that.
That's it.
And so, yeah, the Lord's Gym. That was the building right on the corner here of 4th Plain and Grand Boulevard. So if you think about it, the church actually met in this facility longer than we've been in our current facility. So we've been in our current facility since 1999 or so. It's only 18 years. The church met here for 25 years, 1945 to 1970. And this is probably the main auditorium space. Kids, I guess, was up in the mezzanine area. And the church grew tremendously here.
And now it's Lord's Gym, so it's like a gym during the week.
Yeah.
Like it's on the door, there's times for basketball, like Bible study and basketball, stuff like that. And then on Sunday mornings, they kind of turn the focus that way. There's a stage right there.
Okay.
And this becomes the meeting spot for the church. New Friends Church is what it's called now?
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah, cool.
Interesting.
Well, we moved up here in 67, and it's now 17, so it's 50 years that we've been here. And it's been good. The whole thing has been good. We are here at what used to be Glad Tidings Church, and we're in the office, and a lot of it has changed. It's now a gymnasium, but there's so many memories here of the Sunday school classes where our children grew up, and the nursery where I spent a lot of time, and all the Christmas pageants that we had, the cantatas, learning all of the Gaither songs, which were my favorites. And Ed Lofton was the music director, and he's remained our friend through the years. And the really neat thing is that he went to California, and then he also has a home in Gresham, Oregon, where he comes up and visits. And while he's there, he attends Mount Hood Christian Center, where Demetrius is now the pastor. My first memory was in the nursery. Seemed like I was always in the nursery, but we had, when we moved here, we had a 4-month-old daughter, and I was pregnant with another one. And so we had 2 kids in the nursery right away. it's the friends that we made here have been lifelong friends, and that's one of the things that I think so much about Glad Tidings Life Point, was that the people that we met back then have been wonderful friends all through the years.
I'm Bud Sheets, and my first memory of coming to Glad Tidings was seeing the pastor for the first time. His name was Wayne Adams. I've always enjoyed him. He was a great guy.
Anyway, one of the things that I can remember of things that happened in the past was that the people of this church, like I've said before, stood behind us so much, because in 1978, our 9-year-old son was killed in a sewer line trench cave-in behind our house. And both of our boys were buried, and our nephew was buried to the waist, and he was able to dig himself out and come and tell us what had happened. When we got back there, all I could see was Chris's hand sticking up out of the dirt, and the construction workers from down the street came down to help us dig them out, and the firemen came and the police. And when they got Scott out, well, we got Chris out, he was dead, and when we got Scott out, he was unconscious, but they were able to revive him, and he was in the hospital, I think, for 3 days. But the people in this church were wonderful to us. They brought more food than we could ever eat. The church, they paid for part of the funeral. We didn't have a dime in our pockets, for any of this. The church and the funeral home absorbed the cost of the funeral, and the hospital. I don't know who paid the hospital bill or who paid the ambulance bill. Somebody did. We didn't. And then people gave us money it was beautiful what they did for us. It was the Lord turned it into a beautiful thing, something that could have been ugly, but as I was standing next to Chris's body as he's laying on the ground, it was like the Lord, I'll start crying, I'm sorry, I'm going to try not to, but it was like the Lord was standing right behind me here, and he said, "Do not sorrow, for Chris did not suffer and is now here with me in paradise." So you can't be sad over that, I know where he is. I know where I'm going to see him again one day. He's with the Lord. And so it's just one of those awful things that happens that the Lord takes a hold of, and he orchestrates the whole thing.
The reason that we've stayed here at this church for so many years is because we've found dear friends. And when you come to church, it's just like coming home. You've got so many people that are they love you and you love them.
All right, so we're moving east. Like we're moving further east.
Church starts to move east.
So 1945, 1970 was Lord's Gym, Grand Boulevard, and now the corner of Mill Plain and Andreessen.
Yep.
They were here from 70 to what, mid-90s? Late 90s?
Late 90s. This facility to this day would be the longest tenured place that the church has been at. It was at the Grand Boulevard for 25 years, was here between 27 and 29 years.
This is really cool. Has like a German look to it, some like old European
feeling a little
stuff.
Oktoberfest, right?
Yeah.
So, like you said, starting to move east, pretty much stayed in the same 2 to 3 mile radius for really for the first 30 years of existence, and then moved a little bit east, and was here at People's Church for the next 30 years, and then we moved really far east to our current location, and have been there about 20 years.
So this is the spot where we have a lot of our current leaders, current people at Life Point that grew up in this church, married here, and called this home before 192nd home.
I'm Randy Hoover, and this is my wife, Jackie.
And the significance of this building, or why we're actually shooting here, is because I remember when we were building this facility, and my dad was working on cutting some of the wood, and he let me help him trace out the steps that would be placed here to get up to the platform. And he said, someday maybe you'll actually get married on these steps. And I did. It was here that I met Randy, and 24 years ago, we actually did get married here, and so that's why we're shooting this video here.
This facility is where I actually started serving. So I was an usher.
I've always gone to Glad Tidings, now Life Point. My kids are fourth generation. My grandmother, so I would always spend Saturday nights with her and come. And my parents were actually married down on what is now the Lord's Gym. I was diagnosed with cancer here. Attended with a wig and a mask, and everyone still loved us and accepted us. And I can't imagine going through something like that without a church family. I mean, I don't see how people do it. My dad was on strike one time, and we came down here. I don't know why, we're here a lot. And then there was bags of groceries in our station wagon when we left. And you know how humbling that was for my parents, but just knowing that we're supported and that God is working through His church, through His people.
For me, it was just family that no matter no matter what you went through, you don't just quit when hard times come. You show, because I want to make sure that our kids understood you don't quit when you face hard times. That's when you learn how to persevere and you continue on, and that's how you exemplify God's faithfulness to you, is that you remain faithful to Him and the people that you call your church family.
Sometime in the either late 80s or early 90s, the church purchased this land where our current facility is at.
So, like, what was the thought behind it? Like outside of just like the city's, was it just simply that the city's growing that way? Let's get out there.
I mean, talking to Bo Moline, who was the lead guy there when they purchased the land and when they built the current facility, he said he felt like the Lord was directing the church there because he felt like that the county would grow up around that area that our current facility is in. And this is back when that whole area was just rural. And I've heard people say when the facility, right?
Right. Yep.
When the facility was first built in the mid to late 90s, that people used to call it the church in the middle of nowhere. And it was just as far as you could see. You had no Union High School, you had no Walmart, Home Depot, Costco. That whole area was just all farmland. It was all rural. And during that time, they just, and Moline said, I mean, he told me this personally. He said he felt like the Lord was directing the church out there because the county, with the development of 205 and all the things happening on the east side and campus developments, that he felt like it was going to grow up in that area. And so built the facility right there. And, 20 years later, you go, man, that area
Absolutely.
of the county has massively developed. And so it was a pretty interesting movement, in the Lord's providence to get the church in that sort of epicenter.
I came to Glad Tidings when I was 17 years old, and I'm a little beyond that right now. And I have spent a very, very large part of my life in the system of Glad Tidings, Life Point.
My grandparents moved to Vancouver when my dad was like 6 months old, and started attending what was the grassroots for this church, which was at that point a house church. And shortly thereafter, they moved out into a rented building and started to grow. That's when they became Vancouver Gospel Chapel, as far as I understand. And here we are now, 80 years later, and my kids are fourth generation in this body. Many buildings and many pastors and many people have come through the doors, but the thing that stays for me the most, the reason why I'm still here today, is who we believe in, what we believe, the vision of the church, and what we're here about, and just the community of body of believers that is so strong in the presence of what is now Life Point. That's what keeps me staying here. Then, of course, the second big event was that 2005?
It was December 18th, 2005.
When the windstorm with 74 miles an hour came through the area, and during the middle of the morning service started ripping shingles off the roof. Power went out, pastor continued to preach, then everybody was ushered out, and as they were leaving the building, there were shingles hitting people in the head and hitting the cars. And I happened to be home sick that day, but I got a call from Pastor Steve Ramo, and he said, it's really ripping the roof off. And so I had Jeff take me in the car down here to look at it. And by then, snow is coming, and it's piling on top of the bare plywood, and ice is coming in. And so we ended up being in here in the gym temporarily. We thought maybe temporarily 6 months, but I kind of knew better that was not going to be a 6-month project. And was 22 months on chairs in the gym here with temporary sound, pipe and drape. But we made it work. It was amazing.
Just the work on this building and all the people that were here at that time, just doing stuff, if it was just cleanup or, hauling stuff or anything like that. It was just, the body of Christ came together to really do a lot of tasks it took to get into this building.
So I guess an obvious question is what happened? Because in the Andreessen Mill Plain days, the church was rather large, growing, moving out east. And like you just said, we kind of just recently got back to the attendance and past the attendance that it was in those days. What have the last decade and a half looked like that kind of have told that story?
Yeah, well, so the church, this is in the late 90s. The church moves out, builds the building, dedicates it in 1997, fully occupies it by the end of the 90s. There was some infighting in the church, and a group of the members actually brought a lawsuit against the board and the pastoral staff and even the network, and so there was I think there was the numbers. There was about 70 members that brought that lawsuit against the church leadership, and it was front page news in the Oregonian, and just a really, really dark time in church history. And you look over the span of churches that are, almost a century old, and you're going to have your ups and downs and your times where there's certain leadership issues, or there's certain things that occur within the membership. And true to form, that's those late days where the church was called Glad Tidings, it became a pretty ugly scene in that sense. And so the church actually declined over that period of time by several hundred people. I mean, I've heard numbers and seen numbers in historic documents that the church was running about 1,100 on a Sunday morning pretty regularly in the late 90s for a couple of years consecutively, giving hundreds of thousands of dollars to missions every year. And then by the year 2005, attendance had gotten down to like 350 to 400. So, you lost about 700, 800 people, regular attenders there. And I think some of this was due to probably the recent history with the lawsuit and what that kind of was in the community, and the church kind of wanting to put that to bed, and probably, mid 2000s, and your name is Glad Tidings Church. They're probably wanting to also update the name to something more contemporary and sort of a fresh start, new chapter. And so October 2007, 10 years ago, they opened up the auditorium and rededicated it and changed the name from Glad Tidings Church, which had been the name for 60 to 70 years, to Life Point Church. And so that's how we got our current name in 2007.
So we're back on 192nd now. We're close to the current facility. But Life Point bought a lot of land.
Yeah.
Whenever Bo Moline and his team did that in the 90s. What was the acreage when we got
40
it?
acres.
40 acres.
40 acres, yeah.
And the goal was to build a megachurch, eventually, right? To build a big metro. I don't even know how to say it. To build like a big all-in-one facility, maybe a school,
Yep.
maybe cafes, stuff like that, things like that.
Yeah, I've been told that the amount of land and the way that they planned it was similar to Crossroads, back in the 70s, which had been planted, I think, back in the 70s, 60s
Okay.
or 70s. And Crossroads had already grown up to be a major mega church at that time on the west side. And I believe it was Bo Moline that told me that on the east side, they were looking to build that kind of a dynamic, that size of an auditorium and all those things. The original plans actually had our auditorium to be twice the size, like to where you could build another wing onto it and make it twice the size as it currently is,
Wow.
which would put it, in the 2,000 seat range, which would be kind of Crossroads territory. And so bought 40 acres, and that was the vision, to kind of build a mega church. And if you think about it, they were running over 1,100 when they moved out here and solidified everything. And Bo Moline was in his 30s, probably even his early to mid 30s when he became the lead guy there. So even when they moved, they're running over 1,100, and they've got a lead pastor who's been there over a decade, and he's in his 40s. And so you can imagine they're thinking forward 20, 30 years and planning out, okay, this is what this is going to look like. We'll build a facility on a size of property which will be able to house 5,000 people on a Sunday, and so that was that vision, originally there.
Okay, and then when did Costco come into play?
I think it was 2005, after, and I think it was before the flood, because Costco sits on 20 acres. But of course they still had a mortgage and all those bills to pay and everything. And so I think that they sold the land. I have heard, in an elder meeting when I first got here, the sale of that land was a real major point that kind of fiscally saved the church quite a bit. They were able to pay off some debt and kind of get to where they could survive those lean years after the lawsuit in that period of time.
So even with like 20 acres, you can still do the megachurch thing. Like maybe
Sure.
not quite to the extent, but you can still do the thing where there's a school and there's a massive parking lot, there's an auditorium for multiple thousands of people. But like as we're kind of pulling in right now, I'm looking around and I see all this development going up around us. So that kind of like leads to the last question, and that's like, what's the plan?